July 27, 1898. Marching bands lead thousands of people to the highest point in downtown St. Paul, Minnesota. Columns of veterans, stone cutters, and other workers march to the ribbon-draped speakers stand. Here the new Capitol is rising from the ground. Onlookers lean over the partially finished first-floor walls. Among the throng of dignitaries is Minnesota's first territorial governor, Alexander Ramsey, to officially lay the cornerstone for the People's House, the grandest building in the state and one of the finest Capitol buildings in the country. The cornerstone is 5 feet long with a hollow core to hold a copper box. Into the box are placed more than 45 books, newspapers, photos, and documents, including histories of legislators and soldiers since the founding of the state. The names of the Capitol commissioners and architect Cass Gilbert, as well as his associates, are etched on a bronze plate. But the box contains not a single name of a worker or contractor who erected this structure. Since construction began in 1896, hundreds of workers have already been drawn to this spot. They dug and laid the foundation and built the lower walls. Hundreds more will come to work here through the building's completion in 1907. For some, it is the spark for long, successful careers and the beginning of generations in Minnesota. For others, it's one stop of many in a wandering artisan's life. For others, it will mark the end of their lives. These people all came together to create this Minnesota icon, but they have remained nameless until now. This is their story. Workers left their own time capsules to mark their work on the Capitol. At the base of the gold leaf finial and ball atop the dome, 223 feet from the ground, 3 people gathered exactly 110 years after the day that a mysterious and tantalizing message was left there.
During the selective demolition of the original copper roof, we were fortunate enough that the sheet metal workers that we were working with took it upon themselves to save this small cleat that supports one of the original copper shingles that was up on the roof.
O.C. Mankey, August 10th, 1902. The etch clue sent historian Dave Reilly on a search through city directories, payroll accounts, death certificates, and cemetery records to discover that O.C. was Otto Mankey.
Having my great-grandfather, be so involved in this project, it's very emotional. Actually seeing the handwriting, because it was something I would have never have seen before, and just to put myself in that same position, standing here, I'm sure that he would have never guessed 110 years later that I'd be standing here.
The vast majority of those who worked on the new Capitol came from outside the state. And like Otto, most of them were immigrants or children of immigrants.
He was born here in St. Paul. His father came over here. My great-great-grandmother, she talks about the 4-week journey across the Atlantic.
The Mankeys fled their homeland of Pomerania, part of Prussia, that suffered frequent wars between Germany and Poland. The Rockhots family also left conflict in their country, Bohemia, now the Czech Republic.
When you consider how bad things must have been for them to haul up stakes and everything they owned and come to a completely foreign country in 1863, it must have been pretty terrible. He was the head carpenter at the State Capitol building during its construction and afterwards as well.
While many tradespeople had already come to St. Paul when work began on the Capitol, others were recruited to work on the construction.
The general contractor had been in the South and had observed the work that black artisans were able to do. And so he contacted Cassaville Bullard, who was a mason extraordinaire, and he made him a general foreman.
My grandfather, Cassville Bullard, was a brick mason as well as a stone cutter as well as a carpenter, which was kind of rare. He had 10 children in Tennessee, Memphis, Tennessee, and because of that skill and because of housing discrimination at that time, segregation, racism, and really couldn't find opportunities to work. And so he came here in 1898 and started working on the Capitol.
The general contractor sent Cassville out to find African American or black masons, and around 20 of them came up here, including my grandfather. And Cassville Bullard said, whoever I bring on this job has to perform at a certain level. His house is still standing. That's the kind of quality that he demanded of the people who worked for him. I believe my grandfather had that quality, and they formed a friendship that, as far as I know, lasted throughout both of their lives.
Hoist operator Zebulon Olsen was one of many Swedes who left poverty at home in a great wave of migration to American cities.
We have a marble egg made by Grandpa Zebulon Olsen when he set the stones in building the Minnesota State Capitol building. It's the same marble as in the structure.
This is the egg. This is shared history. There is a connection to the state capitol, and it is strong, and it keeps us here.
As an architect supervising the restoration of the Capitol Dome, Ginny Lakovic has had a chance to study the construction history, read the original building plans, and closely examine the craftsmanship that State House tradesworkers brought to the structure.
Buildings at this time, you relied a lot on the craftsmen, on their knowledge and their sensibilities. There are often comments that say you'll do it this way, and then it'll take you up to a certain point, and then it's using typical methods. And what are those? They didn't describe them at that point. They just relied on craftsmen and the trades to actually carry that forward.
The building was essentially built by hand. Men and horses provided the power necessary to dig, move, and lift materials. Every inch of the surface was crafted by skilled artisans.
The tooling of it and the craftsmanship that went into it is really why the building has held up as well as it has.
Craft workers arrived in St. Paul with this level of skill through rigorous formal and informal apprenticeships in Europe or through American training based on these models.
My training in Italy was mostly being with my father and uncle, and that's how I literally learned how to do everything that was part of stone and masonry.
Stefano worked as a foreman, restoring the steps on the west side of the Capitol in 2012.
Those steps have been there for 100 years, and the workmanship at that time was amazing. They really were proud of what they were doing. And you see those people, even in the picture that I saw, with the hat. And that remember me, those people I used to work in Italy, They were always well-dressed, well-respected workers. Being an immigrant myself, it just, sometimes I think, so this stone was set 100 years ago by a French, by a German, somebody that came to do this job. And sometimes you just think that the history repeats itself.
Artisans commonly made their own tools as part of their trade, like David McAllister's great-grandfather, Eric Isaacson, and his great-uncle, Nils Nelson, Swedish-born stonemasons who served as foremen of the Capitol.
I took this box out of the garage. A lot of times they would make tools on site from bar steel, and a lot of these look to be that type of thing. Somebody put some energy into that a few times.
Nils Nelson could use these tools to cut a stone building block to size or to carve detailed sculptures. Patrick Butler left famine-stricken Ireland in 1852 with a civil engineering degree from Trinity College in Dublin. Patrick was a teacher, contractor, and farmer near Northfield, Minnesota. One by one, Patrick's sons left the farm for greater opportunities in growing St. Paul. The older brothers, Walter and William, became bricklayers and charter members of Union Local No. 1. They struck out on their own and recruited their brothers, John, Cooley, and Emmett, to undertake contracting work. Winning the bids for general contractor to build the main structure in the dome of the Capitol was the greatest challenge the new Butler-Ryan Company and successor Butler Brothers Company had ever faced. It would test every skill and resource they had. George Grant Company won the bid for the first phase of the new Capitol construction, excavating and laying the foundation constructed of limestone from a quarry near Winona. Like the workers, the materials for the state capitol came from all over Minnesota, the nation, and the world. While the type of stone varied from quarry to quarry, the labor to free it from the earth was much like the work in the marble pits of Pickens County, Georgia.
If you started with a company, you pretty much started at the bottom, and unless you was the boss's son or something like that, you know. And they actually had something they termed as the mud gang, and basically their job consisted of the hammer and wedges, lifting or breaking the stone, and so I guess that was probably a pretty dirty job.
And marble weighs 170 pounds a cubic foot, so it's pretty heavy. But back then, you lifted one if you were told to, and you know, and I'm sure that there were a lot of sore backs at night in the marble industry. but the men became real adept at what they did. They were real craftsmen.
And back then, if it's got a little bit cloudy or whatnot, it'd be so dusty in the hole you couldn't see down in there. You'd have to wait till the dust settled.
People who worked in the industry got old fat, but they supported the family.
Most of the quarry companies were started by entrepreneurs who had worked in stone pits or cut stone themselves. The railroads and the men who built and ran them made it possible to construct massive stone buildings that rose across America in the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
With the development of the railroads and the development of spur tracks, smaller tracks, it opened up these quarries to easy transportation of these 75-ton blocks of marble.
While the Minnesota Capitol was to feature flags and artwork honoring the state's Union soldiers who fought to end slavery, the main railroad lines that carried marble for the State House were built by convict labor, overwhelmingly African Americans. The prisoners worked under slave-like conditions because of minor, even fabricated offenses, like loitering or speaking too loudly. The state and local governments even rented out these prisoners to do hard labor for private companies, like the Marietta and North Georgia Railroad, which built the line between the marble quarries and Atlanta on the way to St. Paul. Steam could power engines that pulled or lifted massive loads on tracks or from stationary hoists. But hauling all the tons of stone from the train depot through downtown St. Paul and uphill 90 vertical feet to the Capitol construction site still relied on horse-drawn wagons, guided by teamsters like John Gary. John championed fellow workers' rights, founding Teamsters Local 120 in Minnesota. A shed was built on the northwest corner of the grounds to house the steam-powered cutting and polishing equipment. The continuous din from the stone finishing machinery could be heard many blocks away. The The noise followed the workers at the end of their shifts as they walked or boarded streetcars to go home. Many immigrant workers headed for neighborhoods where people from their homelands had settled together.
European immigrants settled in communities and, in a sense, gravitated to the place where they could speak their language, share their culture.
Most of the women who contributed to the construction and furnishing of the Capitol worked at a distance from the building. In the Butler Ryan office, Catherine Butler, no relation, worked as a stenographer. A New York company that manufactured furniture for the State House was co-owned by a woman. The elegant downtown department store, Schoonemann's, supplied Capitol draperies. Some sewed on location by seamstresses. Several of the women who did work on the State House construction site, like laborers Anna Young, Josie Sharon, and Mary Walker, lived at the House of the Good Shepherd, a Catholic home for impoverished women and girls. Unions brought members and their families together. But workers needed unions for more than socializing. Members banded together to deal with severe economic disparities and the harsh, sometimes dangerous and violent conditions of turn-of-the-century workplaces. 6 workers died in the course of building the state capitol. These accidents stirred up controversy in the newspapers about safety conditions at the Capitol site. The state could inspect sites and request accident reports, but had no authority to enforce safety rules or fine employers.
There were no hard hats, any kind of protection for the head. The scaffolding was built on site and everything was cobbled together using whatever was available. I mean, that the handrails and the guardrails that are now part of all of these projects are there for a reason. I think every safety implement you see as you look across the roofs and at the scaffolding is because of some unfortunate accident in the past.
There was little financial or legal responsibility on the part of the employer or the government for the consequences of accidents. The costs of workplace injuries and deaths were left mainly to individual workers and their families. Stonemason Eric Isaacson had a disabling accident in 1917.
He went to work for Butler Construction until he fell from a scaffolding and broke his back. His daughter, Lillian, must have been about 15 or so, and she went to Johnson High School. She had to leave Johnson and go to work because he couldn't work anymore with a broken back, and there wasn't any insurance for bricklayers in those days.
To ease the impact of illness, accident, or death, many workers joined together in unions, fraternal organizations, and ethnic mutual benefit societies. Members pooled their money and helped one another when misfortune struck. The contributions of the builders to creating such an iconic Minnesota landmark have continued to reverberate through generations of their families in very personal ways.
Here's a picture of my great-grandfather. And he's got a headdress on. He's half Cherokee, I believe, and half African-American.
We had an office in the state capitol. So I'm walking through this building every day. I'm wondering if I'm hearing the echoes of my grandfather or not. He worked on this building. My mother was very, very proud of it. You know, Papa did this, Papa did that, you know, you working with Papa. Papa helped build that building. I mean, of course, according to my mother and Aunt Mary, he was probably the only Mason on the whole building. No one else had anything to do with it except Papa.
Glenn Johnson supervised the lifting of the quadriga, the golden horse statue, when restoration work was necessary to preserve it.
I remember when I was a little kid, I came up here for grade school and got to touch these things, and to get a chance to come up here and work on them, that was fabulous. I think we just kind of take it for granted, the craftsmanship that was put into these buildings and the years it took to put this thing all together. It's just unbelievable that it's still here, and it's this good a shape still after 100 years. Things wear out and they break down, and the weather in this country is harsh, and you got to take care of what you own, and this is the people's. It belongs to the people.
The Minnesota State House is admired throughout the state and across the nation. The beauty and significance of this Minnesota jewel is all the more profound when we rediscover and remember the men and women who built our capital.